All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. All right, so this gentleman's bio reads much like a book. It's a long bio because he's accomplished so much over the years. He's built multiple businesses, both domestic and international, with distribution across 18 different countries. He's currently the founder and CEO of a company known as Outsource Access, which is an offshore virtual services firm. There's no little firm. It has over 500 employees within just the first 4 years, with a target of doubling to over 1,000 staff by the end of 2024. I mean, heck, half of us have a hard enough time just managing a handful of employees. I can't even imagine what it's like managing over 500 employees, let alone 1,000. This company has received over 8 national and global awards. He's been on Inc. Magazine, Best in Business, and my gosh, let's see, Real Leaders Impact Award, Power Partners Award, the Inc. Southeast Regionals list, ranked number 326 of the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing companies list. This guy has done so much, from TEDx speaking to you name it. You know what? Let's just jump right in it. So, Brad Stevens, welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind words. And no, it's all credit to my team and the organization, people I surround myself with, and been very fortunate to have some pretty positive outcomes. Definitely plenty of valleys along there, but some good successes too.
You've done really great. So, actually, let's start off with just an interesting conversation, one that seems to be coming up a lot more. You've grown this company significantly, to a good size. You're doing really well. You work with companies all over the world, especially with your outsourcing and so forth. The one thing we're hearing over and over again is today's economy feels so much different than even last year or years past and so forth. What are you seeing through all your clients and the work that you're doing? What changes have you seen in today's economy?
Well, there's a zillion factors, I guess, that play into it. I just came actually from, I'm a member of EO and YPO. Some of your listeners may be familiar with. I just came literally just right from that to this podcast. We had a YPO Leadership Summit, and a closing speaker was a guy named Peter Zahan, that is just a prolific global, expert on just analyzing civilizations and looking at what the rise and fall of prior civilizations and kind of looking at currently where we are. And really was fascinating was him looking at all the demographic patterns of the United States, China, Russia, South Korea, and just seeing where the bubbles of populations are and how that can be one of the biggest predictors of sort of what's going to happen going forward. And so to get to your question in terms of our economy right now, where we are is, we got this major shift in workforce, right? In terms of the boomer age and as far as the number of employees in terms of working age and what we're going to have to support, kind of longer term. And particularly with the circumstances we're dealing with right now, as it relates to what we see with our clients, is trying to get the right talent into their business and being able to attract the right talent, retain the right talent domestically, here in the U.S. that they're kind of working with. And so it's been an interesting thing in my business is using outsourcing has actually been a way that they've retained their local W-2 talent because they're trying to find these talented individuals into their business. And in order to retain them, right, they're trying to get them to their highest end use of their time and what they're doing and what they're focusing on. They're adding most value every single day. And, when they start integrating offshore resources and supporting them, it's a game changer. And it's very rare they can go to another company that the owner is going to be committed to giving them a dedicated resource to support them, in their journey. So it's been an interesting flux of workforce as it relates to the economy and seeing who's getting jobs, who's retaining them, and some of these new innovative ways of retention that didn't exist before.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and he said, "You know what inflation has done to me and my business?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Inflation has actually forced us to do more hiring overseas." And I was like, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Well, everything is much more expensive for us. We need a certain amount of margins in order to keep the lights on inside of our offices, and we need more talent. It's just unfortunate for us that we're unable to afford the talent that's required at the same level here in the United States as we otherwise could in places like the Philippines and so forth." And I know I've seen it firsthand. There's definitely a huge influx. There's also a lot of misnomers, so to speak. People
Sure.
think that just because they're hiring cheaper labor overseas, that they're actually less talented or have less skill. I've actually found that to be quite the opposite. They're in many cases equally talented, or maybe more in some cases, depending on what it is that you're looking for.
It is. In my industry, when I got into this, before I started this business, I had another business. We manufacture and distribute teeth whitening products globally, of all things. And so it was in that business I started using offshoring and outsourcing and started really wrapping my head around this whole world. And I had a lot of the same, what I call DFCs, doubt, fears, and concerns, as it relates to hiring people overseas, because people all have different preconceived notions. When you say outsourcing, you'll get 100 different answers from people, right? Yeah. It's like that bad customer service experience I had with my cable company with someone that had a bad accent and didn't understand. That's just call centers, or that's just for big companies. And so, but when you know how to embrace it appropriately and integrate it, you understand these people in the different countries and what they're capable of, it truly sheds a whole different light and perspective. So I learned in my last business, and before I launched Outsource Access, I spent about 3 years doing nothing but speaking, consulting, and I would do these 3-hour workshops for business, business organizations like, EO and YPO and otherwise, where I would, be 3 hours, and I would say, hey, everybody, you're coming in the room, and when it comes to outsourcing, I want you to all drop your preconceived notions at the door, and over the next 3 hours, let me reshape what this world is for you. And I would show them videos and examples of the types of work and behind the scenes. When I would go to the Philippines and show them behind the scenes, and I would literally see the whole room, like before it was over, like their eyes were like, oh, I didn't realize that this what this world is. And when I would show them the type of work that they were doing, and I would show them videos of them speaking and communicating, and just they're seeing the incredible competency, and then showing them the offices. Like on our website, I have a tour of our office very specifically just so I can address that concern of like, these people are working in, low level, very poor circumstances. So yeah, it's this whole range of DFCs, doubt, fears, concerns around time zone, around competency, around turnover, around security, about sustainability. And when you step your foot into this world and really embrace it, you realize that those, aren't at all what you thought they were. And to your point, the talent can sometimes even exceed what they may, have had otherwise, in their business. But the last point I'll make around that is what we found in our business is it's very little replacing people a lot of times, like your friend that you were kind of sharing about as far as what they were navigating. But I would say 95% of our business, it's about a business that's trying to get their people into their highest and best use and then integrate our people working side by side with them. And we had this like 2-question exercise. It's like, hey, what do you want to be getting off your plate that isn't the best use of your time for you and your senior managers? And the second bucket, which is really important, is what are the things that you want to be doing in the business that you think you should be doing, but you haven't due to time, money, or knowledge constraints? So it's taking workload off, but then it's also going and doing things that they haven't gotten to yet. So in a lot of cases, what we're doing, it's very additive. It's not replacing people. It's, you take an $80,000 a year, sales rep, and then you pair them with a, $20,000 a year virtual assistant. It's kind of like 1 + 1 = 4. Yeah. So there are definitely some replacement scenarios that occur in circumstances where people can't afford the rates that are locally. But I find in a lot of cases it's integrating with existing staff and helping drive the business forward.
Now, many times it doesn't work for people, not because of the talent on the other side of the line. Actually, it has to do with the way that talent has been managed. And managing in person is different than managing virtual. And both can be incredibly successful. You have to understand it requires a different skill and a different muscle to build. So what advice would you have for people who are now sort of either they're currently managing virtual teams, but they have this doubt as to whether or not they're actually doing the things that they should be doing? Are they as productive as they should be? And so forth. What sort of advice do you have for those folks?
First of all, you got to address those doubt, fears, and concerns with people. People got to understand the competencies there, the capabilities are there. And once you kind of address that layer, then it's now, well, how do I actually transition work to them? What can they do? What are they capable of? And so, again, it goes back to that 2-question exercise of, what are things you want to get off your plate? What are the things that you're not getting to? And so there's this whole discovery process we do with clients to kind of unpack all their constraint points that they're kind of navigating. Because at the end of the day, you have to have some level of organization on your end, right? And to your point, a lot of times the failure is on this side of the equation, not on that side. Sometimes these entrepreneurs and business owners and so forth, they think that they're just going to solve all their problems by just bringing someone. If you have a tornado and you just bring someone into your tornado, now your boat's just going to be in a tornado, right? So it takes, and we honestly won't work with certain people that are just a complete chaotic, scattered mess, right? And they're not willing to kind of take some pause to really help us figure out the best way to integrate and let us work our process with them. And those that do, that pause long enough, Because a part of what we do is we document all their processes for them. So if they'll take time to work with us as we start engaging, because most businesses don't have any of their processes documented, right? So for us to do what we do, we have to document all of their processes. And so we take them through an exercise of kind of unpacking what we call little micro protocols in their business, the steps that it takes to, manage a lead process through, or to, deal with, like one client is in the HVAC, industry. He needs to have all the GPS reports and timesheets reconciled of all his drivers out in the field. They're out repairing, big refrigeration units, grocery stores, and so forth. So it was absorbing and saying, okay, how does our VA from the Philippines step into logging into your GPS reports, extracting the data, exporting them, comparing that with their timesheets? Because the problem is he had people that were clocking hours. They weren't actually working. So by being able to reconcile their GPS reports and see what their trucks are actually driving, and then looking at their timesheets, could reconcile whether or not the person was lying or not.
Right.
It actually had about a $50,000 impact on them. So that's just an example of like one task where we have to kind of unpack, figure out how you're currently doing it, how can we kind of put our hands on it. And then a really critical tool, and you're probably familiar with, is screencasting.
Oh, yeah.
So Loom. There's another called ScreenPal. And it's one of the most valuable tools when someone's starting to work with someone overseas, or honestly, even domestically, virtually. But it allows you to record your screen, your voice, and your mouse, right? So for example, like that GPS tracking tool, the way that the staff in the U.S. explained to the person in the Philippines is they pulled this thing up and hit record, and they just literally went into the platform and said, okay, go log in here, hit this drop down, go do this, hit this export button, and basically narrated with their voice and their mouse and their screen exactly what to do. Then they hit one button to upload it, and it sends them a link, and then they can watch that video.
Yep.
So then you create a set of those, and that becomes a set of the processes and protocols. So it becomes a very, nobody likes to document processes, the most boring thing ever, right? But if they can do it with their voice and their screen and their mouse and explain what to do, then the VA can watch that video, learn how to do it, and then the VA will actually write the documented process from that, right? Yep. So it takes the pain out of detailed process documentation, which keeps people from moving forward sometimes.
Sure, absolutely. So let's kind of take a sidestep for a second. I see you've been on the Inc. 5000. You have a whole bunch of like really great accolades related to your ability to grow the company and grow the company quickly. What would you attribute that growth to?
Every entrepreneur needs a little bit of luck in their pocket, right? I'm a big fan of engineered luck, if you will, right? So, I mean, in terms of timing of where you are with things, most entrepreneurs have some kind of crisis or luck factor that kind of translated into their success or failure sometimes. And Jim Collins calls it, the 10x factor of return on luck, right? And then no company is ever successful that is typically because they've been more or less lucky than another, but it's about being prepared whenever that circumstance happens to take advantage, of it. So for us, with Outsource Access, we launched in 2019, right before, COVID. And we already I've been doing a ton of speaking and had a big following and thought leadership. So when I decided to go ahead and launch the business in 19, we ended up having a big growth, right out of the gates. We got to 80 or 90 employees in the first 6 to 7 months. And I had a phenomenal team, in the Philippines. I ended up finding a woman that I started working with right out of the gates that was my very first VA that I could trust and connect with. We used a system called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. Yep. And so there was actually, being a part of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, I was able to tap the chapter in the Philippines to help support me and they connected me with this woman that helped us implement EOS in our business that created structure kind of right from the beginning. And then, COVID hit, right? And so fortunately, I was about to sign an office space and do the traditional thing that most companies over there do is you bring everybody into an office and they work out of an office. But COVID was about to hit, and my EO forum, I said, hey, do you guys think this COVID thing's real? And should I pause on signing this lease? And fortunately, they talked me out of it. So it forced us to figure out how to build a distributed workforce right out of the gates when a lot of companies struggled. So everybody worked, kind of virtually. And obviously, COVID did have some tailwinds in terms of getting people more, willing to explore virtual and offshore and outsourcing and so forth. We already had good momentum. And I would say it did take a pretty heavy pause with the whole rest of the world for about 2 to 3 months. But then it picked back up at the same clip that it did before COVID. So, it definitely had a bit of a catalyst. I wouldn't say it wasn't massive compared to kind of the growth that we had, beforehand. But I would say it's just doing a lot of the fundamentals. Again, I said I'm a huge Jim Collins person. And a lot of people don't know that Jim Collins, if you go to his website, they know Good to Great, they know these different books and so forth. But if you go to his website, he has distilled all of his key concepts into this thing called the MAP. And he takes all the key principles, the hedgehog concept, the flywheel, the bullets before cannonballs, the first who, then what, all of that stuff. And he distills it into this very tight package into 3 buckets: disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action, being built to last. And the principles are incredibly timeless. And so I've connected to that really early on, and I've really pushed that. Actually, our core values at our company actually spell the word great, because gratitude, relationship driven, ever-long quest for improvement, attention to detail, thoughtful communication are kind of our core values. I would attribute having EOS or having a framework, like whether using Scaling Up or other platforms that are out there, having that framework in place was really critical for us for success in the beginning. Being fanatically focused on culture from the beginning, how we treat our people, we pay our people. So I'm actually incorporated in the Philippines. So we pay everybody's health insurance, we pay their benefits. So we pay them full benefits as employees, in the Philippines. So they're being taken care of, supported. We invest in them heavily. We actually have our own magazine where we actually showcase all of our employees and celebrate them and their successes and print that out every year. But then those timeless principles, actually I wrote an article for Inc. Magazine on it, is sticking to Jim Collins and my team to ad nauseum hears me reference those core principles, whether it's, hey, we need to do bullets before cannonballs. Before we go dump a ton of money in this, let's go try and do iterative tests, right? Let's be fanatical about first who, then what, right? Who we're hiring and making sure we're getting top-level performing, individuals. Having the right score systems and processes from day one. So there's not one thing in particular, but a collection of things to try and lean on, timeless principles and staying consistent.
Got it. And so now shifting gears one more time, AI, how do you see that impacting your business?
Yeah, it always kind of brings up, knowing the business that I'm in, people are you terrified, all of a sudden AI is going to steal all the jobs or take away what you're doing. Frankly, at some point down the road, I don't know how many years, certainly beyond sort of the scope of where I'm at and worried about near term, we'll be able to wake up and just say, hey, computer, generate 100 leads for me that are qualified and get, appointments booked, right? But we're a long, long way from being able to have technology to that place. I think what we're seeing is that we immediately trained all of our staff on ChatGPT and AI tools. We've been doing that for quite some time because the human factor plus these technology tools together can be very, very powerful. Yeah. But the tool alone, we've had maybe one or two staff that we've lost because a client truly got an AI solution that was able to truly completely automate sort of what we were doing for them. Partly because the nature of the work we're doing, we're not doing super low-level admin. We're integrating directly with our clients' staff and their teams, and we're doing some higher-level work to kind of begin with. So we're not just doing routine admin stuff. But secondly, it's about pairing us with that technology. A good example of it is, we got all these automation platforms, right? CRM, Salesforce, HubSpot, right? There's a big one in the commercial services space called Service Titan, right? So we've already had all these great automation tools that have existed out there for business owners to make their life easier, right? But yeah, when we go to clients that are using something like a Service Titan or a HubSpot or a Salesforce, they're literally using 5 to 10% of its capability just because they don't have the human time to go in and use all the tools. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that our staff do is we become experts on those tools. So now a client that's using 10% of the capability of their Service Titan tool, our staff learns how to use all the functionality of it. And so now they're using 60 to 70% of its capability. Yeah. It's a blend of those two resources together. It's very similar to ChatGPT that's kind of come out. It's just knowing the tool exists. Like when I started talking about outsourcing and VAs, just knowing that like lower cost offshore labor exists doesn't solve the problem. Yeah. You need to know how to apply it and integrate it, right?
Sure.
And so it's the same thing with all these AI tools.
Yeah, I look at AI in a number of different ways. Number one, I think that most businesses are woefully unprepared for the impact that AI is going to have on their business because there's so many different ways in which you could be far more efficient. It's kind of like ignoring the fact that the internet existed.
Right.
People are like, oh, the internet's a fad, and those who waited realized that they're behind the eight ball. AI is kind of here to stay. But I also think that AI is very much misunderstood. Some people have gone to ChatGPT and they said, oh, I've tried it and it didn't work before. But you're blaming ChatGPT when in fact you wouldn't blame the canvas for a bad painting. At the end of the day, you're the one that's holding the paintbrush, right? You're the one that's giving it the instructions. And when it comes to replacing employees and whatnot, I get the same thing as a business coach. Again, it's one of those things that people don't understand because in order for me to enter the input, I have to know the context and ask the right question. So if I ask the right question, I can get the right output. And something as simple as somebody more recently was putting in a prompt and trying to get an answer. And they were building out this whole big plan based on this initial prompt. And I said, I think this is actually really good if it was true, but you're missing one key word. He says, what do you mean? I go, you're actually talking to busy executives. Put the word busy in front of executive and see how that changes the overall plan. And when he did that, it actually changed the entire approach and made the original approach completely invalid. So the one thing that will never replace people is context allows you to have that greater, the greater prompt and output. And when it comes to employees and people saying that, oh, these people are going to be replaced, I just worked with a manufacturing company who had a concern about their admin assistants that were being replaced. I said, you know what? Actually, the way it sits right now, they're going to be replaced in many ways. And he says, what do you mean? I said, because they're failing to adapt to current technology. So let's do this. Let's enter a prompt right now and say, in my industry, in my company, how will an administrative assistant become replaced by the year 2028 by AI? And so it added the whole thing. And he goes, see, I told you. And I go, no, you didn't finish it. Now go back. AI will teach you how to compete with itself. So now add, as an administrative assistant for this particular company in this industry, what are the different skills and abilities that this assistant needs to be able to create for itself by the year 2028 in order to remain relevant to the company? And it created a whole list of skills and talents that allow this employee to adapt and become much more relevant and use the tools itself. So, it's one of those things. If people don't adapt, they're going to be replaced. Of course they are. But as humans, we should be adapting and evolving nonstop. And it's just a tool that allows us to perform our job that much better. And the one thing that this tool does that other tools don't do is this tool will actually teach you how to become better at your job, how to compete with it and become relevant. And that's oftentimes not understood.
Yeah, those are great examples. I love hearing, to your point, it's the creative prompting and knowing how to ask good questions. And when you know how to do that appropriately, I mean, you can get what you need out of it. But that's going to be one of the great skill sets that I'm going to get my 8-year-olds to start learning how to do prompt engineering so that she's got a relevant opportunity when she graduates. There's a bit of creativity, I think, that comes along with like these tools of knowing how to use them.
Actually, speaking of kids, I think you get a kick out of this one as well. My daughter, she's 15 years old, and she asked me, hey, can we go to Monaco to the F1 next year? And I said, maybe. She goes, I want paddock tickets, though. And I was like, oh, that's great. I said, have you looked up how much they cost? And she says, yeah, $35,000 for the tickets that she wants. I said, is that for all of us? She goes, no, that's for one person. I said, so then you want me to spend $35,000 per ticket? And she goes, well, can we? And I'm like, I'll tell you what, if you buy your own ticket, then we'll go. And she said, seriously? And I'm like, yeah. So she goes, okay. So if I make $35,000 in the next few months, you'll take me to the paddock of Monaco and F1. I said, deal. So she went to ChatGPT and she said, I'm a 15-year-old high school student with no experience. How do I make $35,000 in the next 3-4 months, whatever it is? But ChatGPT came back and said, you need to set more realistic goals. And so she was so disappointed. But this is exactly where context fits in. Because I said, I want you to go back to ChatGPT and say, my friend made $35,000 in 4 months. She has no experience and 15 years old. How do you think she did it? And then it created the answer. But
interesting.
This is where I love kids using this type of technology. This is where I love employees using this technology. This is where I would encourage virtual assistants, everybody else, use this technology because the more they use it now, the more they're creative they're ultimately going to get, and the more they're going to see how it applies to their business.
Everybody always knows me as like the tool guy. We actually have an email series that's one of the best things I ever created called the Addictive Tool Series. And so it's not a newsletter. Our long-term nurture, that people opt in with us if they don't end up getting engaging with VAs, or if I go speak for a big conference, we send content, but they opt in. And so just once a week, we just send a cool tech tool, right? We're not sending them a 1,000-page newsletter and so forth. If you really want a good long-term nurture for people to stay on long-term, to earn the right to stay in their inbox, whatever your industry is, go find all the neat little tech tools and so forth and make the email bite-sized. Just talk about that one tool. Don't try and sell them anything and so forth. And you keep them on your nurture long-term.
I believe it. So, Brad, this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast, right? What would you say is your biggest, best tip for companies wanting to get beyond seven figures?
Get the right people in the right seats as soon as possible and be willing to pay for them. That's the exact advice I would go back to myself at 21 if I could. That it goes back to honestly one of the Jim Collins' first principles, right? Is it's disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action, and it's just the first who, then what is kind of what his phrasing is around it, right? It's the right people on the bus. There's a zillion ways that you can phrase it. I know it sounds very cliche, right? But any entrepreneur who's been through the pain of having sevens in their life and on their management team, they're not quite bad enough to be 5 or 6s, but they're not good enough to be 8, 9s, or 10s. These 7s will suck all the energy out of you in your life, both on a personal basis and on a business basis. So, whatever it is you're doing, whatever widgets, whatever services and so forth, is be willing to go find the absolute best people you can surround yourself with. And if you don't have the money to pay them, strike a deal, whether it's equity opportunities or whatever it may be, or go raise the money for it. I wish I had focused on, in my earlier businesses particularly, focus on getting the right people in the right seats as early as possible, because that made all the difference in the world. No matter where your bus is going, having those right people. And honestly, use the tools that are out there, whether it's Predictive Index, whether it's Colby, whether it's Culture Index. I know everybody has different philosophies. I mean, you got DISC and so forth. Do multiple ones too, right? We do that in our business. We do Colby. We do Predictive Index. Strengths Finders is another one as well. But aside from objective questions that you do, like top grading is another thing that I highly recommend in terms of our interview process. But just measure 10 times and cut once when it comes to the people you surround yourself with.
I think that's great advice. I learned very early on that if you bring on a C player, you're going to get C-level results. If you bring on a B player, you'll get B-level results. If you bring in an A player, you get A-level results. The funny thing is, a C player, you might get anywhere from like 1-to-1 to a 1-to-3. So a 3-to-1 return. B players, it's exponentially greater. You might get like a 6-to-1 or so return. A player, you get like 10 times or 15, 20 times return. It's phenomenal. The return you get is exponentially greater the more you go from a C player to a B player to an A player. Totally get it. Now, somebody wants to learn more about you and the work that you do. Where do we take them?
I would add to that is that the other thing is that by getting the right people in the right seats, it gets you out of being in the details of the business, right? Which is the other thing that we know. And the reason why there's only 4% of businesses in the United States, and most people don't know this statistic, only 4% ever get to $1 million. 96% never make it to $1 million, right?
Yeah.
And the biggest reason is because they won't surround themselves with the right people so they can emerge out and focus on growing the business. Secondly, and I just saw Steve Jobs snippet on this as well, is that when you bring those C players and make them work with A players, it is the fastest way to lose an A player when you make them work with those B and C players. Yeah. And so that's the other unfortunate negative byproduct by allowing those individuals around, because they're going to depart. But yeah, to answer your question, as far as finding us, OutsourceAccess.com is our main website for what we do, and we service about 75 different industries, in the outsourcing world, and got tons of video and content taking behind the scenes in the whole world of the Philippines. Even if you're just curious, you'll get quite a tourist experience by kind of going and visiting our site. And actually, I have another company called One-on-One Connections that we do one-on-one intros for member-based organizations using technology, and our VA team as well. We help bring member-based organizations and conferences together by doing kind of collisions and intros together. And anybody's interested, we have a bunch of tools and resources that we have back that Addictive Tools series. And so anybody listen to the podcast, if you just send an email to tools@outsourceaccess.com and just put Beyond in the subject line, we'll send you a whole collection of just our top 200 automate and delegation tools, and a template if you want to begin that 2-question process of kind of outsourcing, and a bunch of recorded webinars with case studies and examples. So if anybody's interested in going down the rabbit hole of this whole path, I'm happy to send some resources your way as well.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right, my man, we covered a lot. We covered sort of things changing economies and thoughts, and the ways we looked at outsource and the benefits of outsourcing employees and so forth. We touched upon AI, Jim Collins principles, and a whole bunch. So that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. As a reminder, for more strategies, insights, and tips for taking your business beyond 7 figures, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gaudet with my new friend, Brad Stevens, and I will see you in another episode.